Hey guys, welcome to the Remnant Radio. You're watching one of 19 episodes with Dr. Craig Keener, one of the preeminent Bible scholars on the planet, and we're talking about the Gospel of Mark.
This is going to be an exciting episode. The connections that Dr. Keener put together while we were with him at Asbury Seminary, phenomenal. But man, it was an expensive trip to get all of us out there to film this content. But we want to give it to you for free.
Well, we do want to give it to you for free, but one of the ways that you can help offset the cost for this is by purchasing our home group material. Dawson, our researcher, has put together this material. There's a leader's guide. There is a participant's guide. So you watch the video, you read the material, and then we walk you through. We have discussion questions that go along with it. Could be a huge blessing for you and your church.
Yeah, and this would be perfect for tons of different mediums. Maybe you're a pastor who's preaching through the Gospel of Mark, a home group leader, a Sunday school teacher. This would fit all of your needs. And if you want to pick this up, there's a link in the description for the home group material. In addition to that, maybe you're out there and you don't lead any kind of group like that. Maybe you just want to contribute as a thank you to what we've put together here on Remnant. There's PayPal descriptions in the link of this video if you would like to support us.
So absolutely, click those links in the description, hit that subscribe button, and please enjoy this video with Dr. Craig Keener.
Chapter 15, this crucifixion scene, which is both gruesome and heart-wrenching for every believer. Do you want to just give us kind of an outline of what we can expect here in 15 before we dive in?
Sure. You have the Sanhedrin trial, but it's not really a real trial. The Sanhedrin issue in Mark chapter 14 from verses 53 forward. But now you have the hearing before Pilate. And Jesus is going to be silent before Pilate, some like he is before the Sanhedrin, some. But he's going to give him enough to convict him if he has to, you know. And Pilate is under some political pressure from some other leaders to go ahead and convict Jesus. But Pilate looks for a way around it. Mm-hmm. So he says, well, I can let the crowd decide and blame it on them. But it doesn't go the way he wants because the crowd is influenced by Jesus' enemies. And so Pilate eventually hands Jesus over for crucifixion. We have this chain of being handed over. You know, Judas hands Jesus over to the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin hands Jesus over to Pilate. Pilate hands Jesus over to their will and to the soldiers. And then, you know, Jesus gets crucified. Everybody wants to blame somebody else or pass the buck on the responsibility, but everybody's basically responsible. And then Jesus is crucified on the cross. He utters his final words. And Mark doesn't give us all his final words. It actually tells us he cries out something where Mark doesn't tell us what he cries out. But Mark does tell us one thing that he cries out that's very consistent with Mark's emphasis on Jesus' suffering. And then the women have followed him to the end. We finally hear about them. You know, even Peter has abandoned him, but there are still some followers. Mark kind of saved that. Mark didn't want to, you know, let you know that not everybody quite forsook him, but, you know, the women stuck with him. And then Joseph of Arimathea shows up to make sure that Jesus gets a decent burial.
Okay, so in this, you begin with Jesus and Pilate, and Jesus is asked, "Are you the King of the Jews?" And he responds, "You have said," something to the effect of, "You have said so." What's going on? It's almost like he's being cagey here. Tell us about this interchange.
Well, he is under arrest. He's not really in a cage, but sorry. Okay, my humor has declined. But anyway, I shouldn't be joking about this section anyway. But Jesus' answer is literally, "You say." So it's like, okay, that's the way you put it. It may be something like, "You could say that." That may not be the exact wording that I would use. But remember, Jesus has been announcing the kingdom of God from early in the narrative. Well, now, toward the end of the narrative, the only one who's being called king, you know, you had Herod being called king, and he was actually just a governor, but he's called a king in chapter 6, and he's a rotten, corrupt figure. But here we have Jesus, who's being called King of the Jews. That's even going to be affixed to his cross as the titulus, the official charge. But he's King of the Jews wearing a crown of thorns in his death. It's a very different kind of king than what he's been reported to Pilate as claiming to be, and a very different kind of king than what Pilate envisions when Pilate asks him the question.
I mean, throughout the story of Mark that we've been reading, people will try to trip up Jesus and trap him, and he seems to decimate them at every turn. But in the one moment where he could defend himself, like, he is silent. Why does Jesus allow these false accusations to pin him to a cross?
Because he's obedient to the will of his Father. He came to save us, and the cross is why he came.
Amen.
Okay, so as we progress forward in the scene, we have the whole Barabbas situation.
Yeah.
And curious about the name Barabbas and his character, because we learn he's a murderer and an insurrectionist. And so there's a trade of Barabbas, the murderer and insurrectionist, for Jesus. Take us into that scene, explain it, including the meaning of the name.
Yeah, Acts 3:14 and following. You asked Pilate for a murderer to be granted to you, and you killed the Prince of Life. You know, the contrast that's there. But the name Barabbas, Mark has already given readers the clues for that. I mean, he knows most of his audience doesn't know Aramaic. Mark, I believe, is from Jerusalem. He knows Aramaic and Greek. But he's already told us about Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus. Bar is Aramaic for son. And as far as Abbas, well, we've already heard Abba, Father, in 1536. So you've already got, okay. I mean, I don't think Mark makes up this name, but I think where Mark has a name available where he can do some irony with it, you know, he's going to report the name. I mean, this is probably not the guy's first name. He was the son of somebody called Abba, or maybe it's just somebody who called his father Abba, which would make it, you know, anybody could be called that. But anyway, Barabbas, he's a lestes, he's a robber. Jesus was being arrested as a robber back in chapter 14. Jesus is the real son of the Father. And they ask for a different,
Son of an Abba.
a so-called son of an Abba. Also, I think Pilate's trying to outwit the chief priests. I mean, we read about Pilate and Josephus and Philo. He didn't get along too well with the local aristocracy. But he was a bully. But they also knew how to outwit him sometimes and make him back down. And eventually he lost his position. But he stayed in till 36. He was in there about as long as Joseph Caiaphas was high priest from the year 18 to the year 36. Well, Pilate is still the governor, and Pilate has this custom, maybe it's a custom inherited from earlier governors, that he's going to release somebody to show his clemency at the Passover. And so people are coming and asking him to release somebody, and Pilate thinks, oh, this is a good idea. Well, I don't have to turn down the high priests directly and make more trouble with these local leaders here. I can just let the crowd decide. They've already told me Jesus is really popular with the people and very dangerous. I don't think it's dangerous at all. I actually think John 18 may give us some of Pilate's reasoning because, you know, so you're a king then? My kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is about truth. Otherwise, my disciples would fight. Oh, okay, so he's that kind of king. Pilate knew in the Gentile world about these cynics and other kinds of otherworldly philosophers who would talk about, yeah, we have the right to reign as a king, but they were apolitical. Sometimes they'd make fun of everybody. Some cynics actually did get themselves in trouble, mocking kings and so on. Criticizing the Nero's new baths, the same time that Tigellinus had just finished them, that got a cynic in trouble. But normally, they were considered harmless. And he's that kind of king. He's just a sage. And so Pilate really is like, this guy can't do anything. He can't hurt anybody. Just let him go. So, but Jesus isn't worth the political backlash of, wanting to grant them a favor. So if the crowds will ask for Jesus, that's great. He's popular with the people, so he offers the crowds that chance. But the chief priest suggests, how about Barabbas? Well, Barabbas is a real threat. Now, Barabbas, he may not claim to be a king. We don't know either way, but he may be a revolutionary. Laestes sometimes meant that. And he ends up having to let the revolutionary go because those who are politically smarter than he is outmaneuver him. And he's already committed himself, so he ends up handing Jesus over.
So this is a real quick question, and because it's not in our notes, I just thought of it, though. Could he have gotten in trouble, Pilate? If this guy was an insurrectionist, could he have gotten in trouble for releasing this guy?
If the guy was an insurrectionist and somebody reported him to Rome, yeah.
Dang. So he really, he honestly thought they were going to pick Jesus.
But with Barabbas, he's already committed himself. So maybe somebody will tail him and kill him a little bit later. If you saw the movie Risen, actually, he dies later on that day. But anyway, that's in the movie. But.
Yeah. Okay. So just following up on that, is it important to the narrative that Pilate couldn't find fault in Jesus?
Yeah. Now, Luke makes a whole lot more of that. In fact, in Luke 23, when Mark says Jesus is the Son of God, that's what the centurion says. Luke actually, you could say, tones it down, but picks an actual implication. I mean, if Jesus is the Son of God, then he's probably also innocent, a righteous person, at least if he's the Son of God in Jewish terms. Maybe not, you're thinking of Heracles among Greeks, but he's a righteous man, he's innocent. And that's even what the centurion declares at the cross. Luke really has a heavy emphasis on Jesus' innocence, and then in volume 2, the book of Acts, heavy emphasis on Paul's innocence, because, in the diaspora, the Christians are being faced with, okay, well, the founder of your movement actually was executed he was executed for high treason as a revolutionary against Rome. But that was the governor knew better. Okay, well, your big leader of the Gentile Christian movement, the diaspora mission, he was also executed in Rome, and so Luke has to deal with that. But yeah.
Okay, so they hand Jesus over to be crucified, and Roman soldiers take him from here. They begin to beat him. They mock him. They get on the ground. They start paying homage. They put a purple robe on him, give him the crown of thorns. They're striking him on the head with the rod and spitting on him. That's the one that always gets me on an emotional level. It's such a mark of, it's not the pain so much, the disgust. And but it's all mixed together. Physical pain, disgust, shame, everything. I can understand the Jewish people going to full extremes in this. The Romans, I mean, yeah, they wanted to mock a revolutionary, but it seemed obvious that this was not a real revolutionary. So why are the Romans so into this?
When you have some American soldiers abusing prisoners in Iraq, this was, some time ago. Actually, it was maybe a couple decades ago. I don't remember, but not quite.
The Abu Ghraib scandal, maybe.
But I mean, that's happened in prisons in the U.S. I mean, not to that extent, so far as we know, but abuse of prisoners is pretty common around the world, even today. And some places it's just standard practice. It was standard practice in antiquity. People often abused prisoners. They could get away with it, take out their worst instincts, just like the anonymous Facebook comments that people sometimes post, that kind of base human nature that sometimes comes out. Anyway, for the Jewish leaders, for them to abuse him, them to mock him as a false prophet, a false Messiah, but for these people, there's also probably an anti-Semitic element. they may not even like, the ones who are stationed in Jerusalem or the ones who are visiting from Caesarea. In Caesarea, we know that the Syrian soldiers stationed there didn't always get along well with the Jewish community. Cornelius, of course, is an exception in Acts. But there may be an element of anti-Semitism here. And they're beating him, "Oh, hail, King of the Jews." And of course, the irony is, guess who he is? He really is the King of the Jews. And they're bowing before him. Well, someday they are going to really bow before him again. But they're bowing before him with this fake homage. They're hailing him, which would be something like Ave Caesar, Hail Caesar. When they're giving him this rod and then beating him with this rod, it's probably a bamboo scepter that was used for military floggings, but they can pretend it's like a scepter, a bamboo cane used for military floggings, but they're using it as a scepter. The spitting on him, some have compared that with the kiss of homage. That's kind of a stretch maybe, but the crown of thorns, some people think it's from a canthus shrub. Maybe, there's other theories about it, but normally with a Hellenistic king's or prince's diadem, the spokes would be pointing outward. It would be a wreath, but they probably design it so the thorns will point outward, but you can't really weave a crown of thorns in such a way that all the thorns are pointing in one direction. And, the scalp bleeds a lot, bleeds profusely, so this is going to be, there's going to be blood all over the place. And the scourging, remember I said at one point what Josephus said about Joshua ben Hananiah, where he was scourged until his bones showed. The scourgings could be pretty serious. Jewish beatings, they were limited to 39 lashes. That was the Torah. The Torah said you can't go beyond 40, but Jewish tradition said you can't go beyond 39. Paul got that a few times. But Roman soldiers could beat you till they got tired. They could beat you if they thought it was fun. They could just keep beating. And they didn't use just a whip of calf leather. They often would have pieces of metal in the tips. If you've seen the Passion movie, you get the sense of what that beating could have been like. But so in 15, 16 through 20, they're beating him, the crown of thorns. The purple robe was probably a faded soldier's cloak. The cape could be reddish, but in Greek, some of the divisions of colors, the electromagnetic spectrum doesn't have to be divided exactly the way we divide it. And in Greek, there's some overlap among colors. And you have it's often translated the pale horse in Revelation 6. It's really chlorostipos. It's the green horse. But green overlaps with grayish, palish gray, like a corpse. And so, so it's like reddish purple. It's close enough to be like royal purple. Purple was really expensive. And it had been used for a long time. In fact, back in the Old Testament period, back in the period that Homer reports, for many centuries, Phoenician mollusks, shellfish, would be crushed, and they would squeeze the guts out to get this purple dye. And purple robes were very expensive. You'd have to squeeze hundreds of shellfish, thousands maybe of shellfish, to get enough purple dye to dye a whole robe. And of course they stank because it was from shellfish guts, but it was considered such a luxury item that,
you just put up with the
conspicuous
stank.
consumption. Yeah. So, but this is probably a faded soldier's cloak that they use this way. But they're joining in the mockery. And the irony is, this really is the king. But guess what? For the centurion, later on, he's going to have this knowledge, okay, this guy has been accused of being king.
So, in this narrative, I've got another question that's in here that we didn't put in the notes. Is there significance to the crown of thorns being thorns and the curse And thorns and thistles, maybe?
Could be.
Okay.
And some other texts in the Old Testament as well. I mean, the ground being cursed with thorns, and
Sure.
yeah, well, that and in Isaiah and so on. But the big thing is the crown.
Yeah.
This is where the King of the Jews is coronated. This is what Jesus' kingship is about.
Yeah.
At this point in history.
That's awesome. Okay, so Jesus is there. He's been scourged. He's been beaten after this scourging, and then he comes out. He's carrying a cross. I'd imagine he couldn't carry the cross just because of the beating. Like your physical body can't take that much. And then a passerby, Simon of Cyrene. Why Simon? Why is his name mentioned? Mark's kind of keeping people anonymous right now.
Yeah. The horizontal beam of the cross is normally what a person would carry out to the site of their execution. They often would have the upright stake, the paulus, would already be on site.
Okay.
Now, if you had to crucify lots of people, they just use trees, string them up on trees. But for this, official crucifixion, this is Passover festival. It's going to get a lot of publicity. How many views you're going to get on Facebook with this? Crucify him on the road where all the passersby will see him is a warning to would-be revolutionaries or whatever. So normally the condemned person would carry the cross, and that's what you have in John, and probably that's what he starts doing, because that was the norm. But if he, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. I skipped that in chapter 14. Jesus himself, not my will, but yours be done. He had to. His spirit was willing, his flesh was weak, but he overcame. But his disciples, no, they went to sleep on him.
Yeah.
But here, there's only so much a human body can do, and so they draft a bystander. This was standard Roman practice, not to always draft a bystander to carry the cross, but they could draft anybody to carry something for them, like for a mile. And Jesus says in Matthew 5, carry it 2 miles for him. Oh, please, may I carry it another mile? This is so fun. I really love you so much. And the Roman's like, get away from me. You're weird. But, so they draft a bystander. But remember, Jesus told his disciples, take up your cross and follow me if you really want to be my disciple. And they're not there to do it. And so this highlights somebody else has to be drafted to do this. A non-disciple has to be drafted to do this. And he's actually, he's probably Jewish. He's from Cyrene. And Shimon Applebaum, in his book on Jews in Cyrene, I think he argues like maybe a quarter, maybe even a third, I don't know, but a significant portion of Cyrene's population, like Alexandria's population, was Jewish. But there also was the indigenous North African population and the indigenous, well, not the indigenous, the Greek population there. Simon is technically a Greek name, but it was used by a lot of Jews because it was so close to the patriarchal name Simeon. It was actually the most common Jewish male name. You can probably guess the most common female Jewish name was Mary or Mariamne or Miriam.
All the rage in the baby books of the first century.
Yeah. So, but this is a common name. It may be emphasized to contrast with Simon Peter, who said he'd follow him. But I think there's also another reason for mentioning his name. I think Mark knows his name, and probably he's no longer living in the Jerusalem area when this happens. I think Mark knows his name, and I think Mark's audience already knows Simon's name, because Mark identifies him as the father of Alexander and Rufus and doesn't specify who those are. So those are apparently known. And it's possible Alexander was a way common name. Rufus wasn't like as common as Alexander, but it might be the same Rufus who's mentioned in Romans chapter 16 in the church in Rome. All roads lead to Rome. A lot of people ended up in Rome. But Simon was originally from Cyrene. maybe he actually was just there for the festival. He's coming in from the field, but he may be one of those people sleeping in a tent in the field. In any case, he picks it up. But the fact that his name is known and that his son's name is known probably suggests that he becomes a disciple at some point, but probably not yet at this point.
Huh. Okay, and so he's led away to Golgotha, which Mark tells us is the place of the skull. What can you tell us about Golgotha?
Well, there's been a debate since the 1800s. Protestants wanted their own site, and General Gordon said this is Gordon's Calvary because they thought it was shaped like a skull. Probably, I think more likely, it's not shaped like a skull so much as it's a place where people die, and that's where it gets the name Place of the Skull. Although I think, Mark translates it. He doesn't translate Gethsemane, but he does translate this one, and I think maybe one reason he translates this one is because Jesus is going to be the head of the corner, and he's crucified at the skull. Well, maybe not. That's one theory. Maybe I shouldn't jump at that one, but more likely, this site is near the tomb, and more likely the traditional Catholic and Orthodox site is the correct one, and there are good reasons for believing that, and maybe you guys will ask me about that when we get to chapter 16. Since it's shorter than this chapter, maybe I'll save it for there. See if you ask me. But
Okay. Jesus is on the cross. He's offered two different kinds of...
Actually, I shouldn't say it's more likely. I should say there's no chance that it's Gordon's Calvary. That's absolutely out. The tomb is from the wrong period. This supposed groove for the Rolling Stone is just a feeding trough. Or a place to drink water from or whatever. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
No, I like that. It's like... I want to be clear. What I wasn't saying was this guy is even plausible, because that's not a thing. Okay, so Jesus gets on the cross. He's offered two different wines. He has a wine that's mixed with myrrh. And that maybe, even if I get my timeline wrong, he might have been offered that before he gets on the cross. But maybe you can speak to that. Maybe, is it on the cross, during the cross? And then he has another wine that's offered to him that's a sour wine. One mixed with myrrh, one that's sour. Why two different wines? What does that mean?
The sour wine is probably Pascha, which was available to soldiers. But the wine mixed with myrrh, some have argued that myrrh was a soporific agent. It helps put you to sleep. So it could function as a painkiller. That's been disputed, and perhaps with good reason it's been disputed. But wine mixed with myrrh was expensive. Mm-hmm. So it's not like the cheap wine, the Pascha that they're offering. This is luxury wine. It's part of the mockery, probably, that they're giving him. At the same time, wine, maybe even sour wine, but wine, because it has vinegar in it. But anyway, wine has a pain-killing function.
Sure.
And so, I mean, even Proverbs talks about that. Give it to the one who's perishing. It's not for kings to drink, but give it to the one who's perishing. So Jesus is given that, but he refuses to drink. He came to embrace our pain, chose to embrace it in full measure.
Okay, so from there, there's continued just mocking, and you're the king, save yourselves, said you'd rebuild this temple in 3 days.
The whole irony is what they're saying is true.
All these things are happening.
Right. Okay, so they're continuing to chastise him. In the 6th hour, darkness comes over the land. And in the 9th hour, he cries out in a loud voice, words that you can probably pronounce better than me, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, I've heard preachers say before, the Father literally forsook the Son here. There was a break in the Trinity for 3 hours when the world turned dark.
That aggressively.
Yes, I've heard that before. Jesus is clearly quoting from Psalm 22, but can you put all this together for us? What's happening, and what do you think of preachers who say that?
Don't tell us what you think of preachers who say that. Just answer the question.
The darkness, by the way, coming at noon at the 6th hour, Amos talks about that. But there are all sorts of passages where darkness signifies judgment, the plagues in Egypt and so on. But Jesus' prayer is quoted in Aramaic. Matthew quotes it in Hebrew, slightly differently. The original, normally you were supposed to offer those kind of prayers in Hebrew, but it's in the Psalm. But Psalm 22 is one of those prayers of the righteous sufferer. We talked about it at 1434. Now we're at 1534. And some of the other elements of Psalm 22 seem to fit crucifixion pretty well. And the dividing of his garments, I think that's Psalm 69, where they cast lots for his garments. That also was a Roman practice, that prisoners could do that. Soldiers could do that with the prisoner's last remaining things that they have on them. But it also echoes the language of a psalm. And then walking by, wagging their heads, also is psalm language. But when he quotes from Psalm 22, verse 1, Jesus prayed the Psalms regularly. Many Jewish people, probably most Jewish people, prayed the Psalms regularly in the synagogue or recited them regularly in the synagogue. So he knows how it ends. He knows that the psalm ends with the psalmist not being forsaken, with God vindicating him.
Amen.
So Jesus knows how it's going to turn out. And that's why he can say, my God, my God. But at the same time, we ought not to play down the fact that it is the first verse of this psalm that Jesus is quoting. And that what he's experiencing is abandonment. Look, everybody else has abandoned him. The one who was going to be with him no matter what, his Father, he's now experiencing that abandonment. He's experiencing that being cut off. Now, how literal is that? Well, in John's gospel, Jesus' Gethsemane prayer becomes well, I'm not saying Jesus didn't pray the prayer in Gethsemane, but I do believe he prayed the prayer in Gethsemane, but John is going to give a different emphasis, a different twist on it. So, Father, the hour has come. What should I say? Save me from this hour? For this purpose I came for this hour. John 12. And in John chapter 16, he says to the disciples, everybody's going to abandon me, but the Father will always be with me. So we get a different theological emphasis on this in John. But I think Mark is showing us the full weight of what Jesus is experiencing. The worst possible thing would be to not be with his Father, with whom he'd always been in communion from all of eternity. Now, I don't believe he stopped being part of the Trinity by any means, but I believe he experienced abandonment. And that really adds a meaning to the cross when they've been together for all of eternity. And he's been with the Father all his life.
Can I ask a question of clarification on that? Just, I think I could say that I've experienced abandonment, like moments of trial or moments life gets rough. I'm like, man, I feel like I've been abandoned by God. And it's an authentic experience. But at that same token, I can also say, but God hasn't abandoned me. Could the same have been said?
Oh, Jesus knows how. He's been predicting what's going to come.
Yeah.
So, he may know it cognitively, but
experientially,
I know this is a digression. I've been trying not to do digressions given the limited time. But,
I know. Yeah, I'm sorry.
But,
that's my bad.
No, but there was some years ago, actually it was a reaction to some anti-malaria medicine. My wife and I were preaching about ethnic reconciliation to a country in Africa that had just gone through a war to 1,700 pastors. But while I was there, I was on this anti-malaria prophylaxis. But what the doctor hadn't told us, I think the doctor didn't know, but pretty soon you see news articles coming out that soldiers are experiencing this, committing suicide and having psychotic effects. Well, it gave my wife nightmares, but what it did with me, it drove me over the edge. I've always been ADHD. And so this really drove my nervous system haywire. before that, there were times when I could feel guilt. Oh, and I hated feeling guilt. So I would like to avoid that feeling. I would like to avoid doing something bad. But what happened at this point was that same feeling that was associated with guilt, I started experiencing it continually and having panic attacks. I didn't know what panic attacks were at this point until I confided in a counselor friend. I said, I don't think I could be demon possessed, but then I sure feel like I'm demon possessed. And I started telling him about the symptoms. He said, those are panic attacks. But I'd been having panic attacks about panic attacks, and it just was, I felt guilty all the time. I mean, I would look at a picture of peanuts, and I would say, oh, I instantly, and I didn't understand the difference between my amygdala, something going through quickly, and me being able to process and rationally think about it. But the moment I saw the peanuts, it was like, oh, I desired those peanuts. I should not have done that. I should desire only God. I am guilty.
Oh my.
It was terrible.
Yeah.
And so, I was going through a dark night of the soul.
Sure.
And it's just, physical pain is awful, but psychological pain, and when you read about outer darkness and gnashing of teeth, the thought of, in this world, people aren't totally alienated from God. There's all sorts of stuff, all sorts of blessings we take for granted, like one another, fellowship, joking around, food, air to breathe. But being alienated from God and all his blessing. Anyway, I'm digressing too much, but yeah.
Okay.
His awfulness was worse than what we can imagine.
Okay. Well, Craig, we're nearing about 40 minutes, which is about 10 over what we would typically do. I hate to end mid-scene. We have a few items to address with the death of Jesus on the cross, then burial,
Quite a few.
and then Mark 16. I think we should probably finish those next week. Do you feel okay about that, or do you feel like we should finish this scene?
No, we can do it next week.
Okay.
And that way everybody will say, you cheated me. You told me you were going to cover Mark 15. I'm never going to watch you again. Or they'll say, oh boy, we can't wait till next week.
I hope you've enjoyed that episode on the Gospel of Mark with Dr. Craig Keener. If you want to go back and watch former episodes that we've done, there's a playlist right here, or you can watch the very next chapter, which will be listed right here. If you've been blessed by this episode or other episodes we've done, consider giving. There are links in the description.